Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have a collection of horrors for your ears. But before we jump in, a word from our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends has taken over and gaming will never be the same again. Raid is the first game to bring a true console level experience to your phone. They've set the bar high and there's no going back. Explore millions of champion combinations and master countless tactics as you take on raid bosses, dungeon runs, campaign battles, and PvP arena matches. With hundreds of artifacts to equip and over 500 champions blessed with unique skills, you can build your team, develop your champion, and raid your way. Use my link to download Raid yourself to your mobile phone or PC. I've really enjoyed using the brand new characters Brachus the Shifter and Sissia Flametongue. Not only are they both insanely strong, but they look extremely cool, and would be an incredible addition to anyone's party, as they hit hard, and Brachus can even come back to life after he dies, a serious powerhouse at your disposal. I personally really like the fact that the game has something for everyone, from PvP to boss battles and much more, especially as they have just released 11 new champions, 20 brand new missions, a reward champion, and 5 tough new levels to almost every dungeon. There is loads to keep you on your toes. So what are you waiting for? Go to the video description, click on my link to support the channel to download Raid today. My mother used to work in a hotel in Washington, D.C. back in the 90s as a housekeeper/maid, since she needed the money because she was a refugee from Vietnam. Even though she didn't speak much English at the time, she knew enough to get by at her job, and all the other staff and hotel guests loved her because of how sweet she was. Because of this, any high-profile guests such as the Backstreet Boys would stay at the hotel. The manager always sent my mum to clean the room, since she was so good at it. Anyway, one day a guest comes called Mr. Michelson. He checked into the most expensive suite. As usual, the manager told my mum to go take care of his room. As she got there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign, so she told the manager she would come back later. What was weird was that no one was ever allowed into his room. The man stayed for almost a month, and not once did he let staff come in to clean. However, he paid a lot, and gave a warm welcome every time he passed as staff member/housekeeper, so no one paid him any mind. Then one day came, when people didn't see him anymore, so they assumed he checked out. Even though the receptionist had no account of this, since it had been so long since the room was cleaned, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore, the manager told my mum to check it out, and to try and clean up what she could. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure it out, but she continued to survey the room, which was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a rave, even though no other guests seemed to have ever gone into the room besides Mr. Michelson. It had looked like he had deserted the place without telling anyone. My mum was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. As she followed her nose, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a cardboard box on the ground, from which the smell was resonating from. In that moment, from being a housekeeper, my mother's first instinct was to open the box and see what was in there, to clean and/or throw it out. When she opened the box, what she saw scarred her to this day. It was the rotting/decomposing head of a young woman, chopped off. My mother immediately screamed and got out of there, and fainted in the elevator. Once she woke up, cops were everywhere, and the hotel was like a CSI scene. The manager told her that the resident didn't leave his real name, and had used a fake credit card to check in. The head of the woman had been identified as a local sex worker. I never learnt the nitty-gritty details, but needless to say, my mum quit that same day. This happened earlier in the year. I was on vacation in Costa Rica with my family, and one other family as well. Not counting me, the 17-year-old female, there were 3 other girls there, my sister Sophie of 14, my friend Julia of 15, and her sister Michaela of 11. Mac and Julia belonged to the other family. We were staying at a resort that had a massive pool. It was later at night, probably around 10ish, and our families decided that we were going to the pool for a swim. This was our second day, and we had gone on a volcano hike earlier, so we were looking forward to hanging out for a bit. The parents dashed off to the swimming bar that was up in one of the pools, and us kids decided we were going to go to the water slide, which was in a completely different area. I was the oldest and fairly responsible, as well as being a certified lifeguard, so the parents had little problem leaving me in charge of the rest of the girls. The 4 of us hung out in the pool, having a grand old time for a while. We all took turns going down the slide. It was kind of scary actually. And after a while, the 2 youngest ones, Sophie and Mac, went off to find the parents and hang out with them for a bit. Julia and I stayed to go down the slide a few times. The slide was set up so that there was a long set of gradual steps that would wind up the side of this hill thing and into another little pool at the top, near the top of the slide. On the far side of this pool, there were a few more steps that led to the actual entrance of the slide. There were only a few trees and bushes that separated the steps from the resort road. By the entrance to the slide, there were no trees or anything that you could access the entrance from the road from. To put it simply, we had an obscured view to the road and vice versa. Anyway, Julia and I were standing at the top of the slide waiting for the last little kid to go down before we went. The kid went, and we kind of stood up there for a bit, just talking and taking advantage of the lack of younger siblings, when we heard this motorcycle drive by behind us on the road. We turned around, and sure enough, a man on a motorcycle was just cruising down the street. We didn't think anything of it and went down the slide. When we came back up for another go, the man was just sitting on his motorcycle out on the road. He wasn't blatantly watching us, but when we turned to look, he would find something to do and look away. Julia and I are teenage girls, and we're in pretty good shape, so it was creepy but not super weird that this dude was looking at us. We went down the slide a few more times each, and this dude would drive up on his motorcycle. We were pretty creeped out at this point, so we left. Julia and her family went to their room, and me and my family went to ours. I was in the bed closest to the window, and so I was the only one in my room who saw a headlight or something drive up to our window. We were on the bottom floor, and I leaned over and pulled back the blinds a little because it was late, because I wanted to know who was blasting their headlights in. Sure enough, it was the motorcycle dude. I was quite shaken, so I woke up my dad, who went out onto the patio, and as soon as he saw him, because my dad stands at 6'1" and is 200 pounds, the motorcycle man sped off. I stayed close to my family for the rest of the trip. Needless to say, creepy motorcycle man peeping on underage girls, let's not meet. My boyfriend and I recently traveled to Orlando for a quick trip to Disney. We decided to save money by staying at a resort. I would never classify this place as a resort, but it had resort in the name. It was about 15 minutes from the park. Anyway, we had just gotten back from a long day of being at Universal and were laying in bed drinking beer and watching TV, just hanging out. Neither of us had gotten up off the bed since we returned, beside maybe an occasional bathroom trip. About an hour after being back, there was a knock at the door and my boyfriend got up to answer it. A Hispanic man dressed in a white shirt and blue jeans was at the door, and my boyfriend asked if everything was alright. He hesitates and says, "We got a call from 911 from this room. Is everyone okay?" This is why I previously mentioned that neither of us had moved from the bed, as none of us had touched the hotel landline at all. My boyfriend says we're fine, but being the observant person he is, he immediately asks why he was the one responding to a potential 911 call and not the police. The man says he worked at the hotel as a maintenance man, and they sent him to check everything out. He then asks if he can come in to check to see if everything was okay, and my boyfriend says no, but he'd be happy to let the police in if they were to show up. The man becomes hesitant, but backs down and says, "Okay, if the police come, we'll send them." My boyfriend closes the door, but it's not sitting well with him. He leaves to go ask the front desk about it, and tells me to deadbolt the door when he leaves and not to answer it for anyone. He comes back and says the front desk knew nothing about it. We didn't leave the room for the rest of the night, and kept the deadbolt on the rest of the time we were at the hotel. I can't even imagine what might have happened if I'd have opened the door while my boyfriend was out getting food or something. I come from a South Asian country where it's kind of unsafe for a girl to go out on solo adventures. That being said, there are some states which are relatively safe. 2019 had been a rough year for me, but by October I'd started feeling rather better and decided to take a solo trip for my birthday. I spoke to some friends and decided to head to this small village down south. My brother helped convince my overprotective mother, as he'd already been there, but to put her mind at ease I decided to grab some pepper spray. Unfortunately, we couldn't find one, so I kept a bottle of deodorant and a knife handy. I decided to stay there for 5 days, and booked a room at a guest house for only 2 days, thinking I would check out this guest house that my friend had suggested and hopefully spend the remainder of my stay there. To tell you a little more about this village, it's a hippie paradise, if you know what I mean. Everyone is extremely friendly and warm, and they have tourists coming from all over the globe. Once I got to the room, I was a little paranoid because it seemed a little dingy. Forget about security systems, the latch on the door was barely functional. The first night was a bit unsettling, but nothing happened. The next day was my birthday, so I rented a bike and went out exploring the village. Sometime after lunch, I decided to check out the guest house that my friend had recommended, which was a little secluded but extremely peaceful. As I reached there, I was greeted by the owner, who showed me around. This place had big huts on one side and a small row of rooms on the opposite side. I decided to take the latter, as it was much cheaper, and I didn't plan on being in the room much anyway. We exchanged numbers and I told him I'd move in the next day. The next day I got there and had lunch with the owner, and he told me about the history of the place and a bit about himself. I realized that he wasn't around when my friend had been here. I was trying to read him, see if I was getting creepy vibes from him, since I was going to be spending 2 nights there, but didn't see any red flags in particular. After lunch, I went to a restaurant that was right behind the guest house. I met some of the locals whom I was already acquainted with. Along with them, there were 2 new guys, one of whom was from my city. The 3 of us instantly clicked and started hanging out. Once it got dark, we came back to my guest house to chill. When the owner told us that he was planning a bonfire with some of his guests/friends who were sitting at another table, an hour passed. We ate, played cards, but the guys didn't seem like they were much in the mood for bonfire, and left shortly after. Since the owner had already set things up, we decided to spend some time by the fire with him. We were all sitting and chatting until midnight, when the other 2 boys decided to take off as they weren't staying there. I told the owner that I'd head back to my room too. He tried to convince me to stay out a bit longer, but I didn't want to be alone with him. My room door had 4 to 5 locks, but only 2 of them worked, so I locked them and realized that the windows facing each other did not have any panes, and the curtains were made of scraps of cloth, which meant that anyone could peep inside to see everything. So I went to the bathroom to change and clean up, As soon as I stepped out and started rummaging through my bag, I heard someone whisper my name twice. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze for a few seconds. I decided to ignore it and quickly turned out all the lights. Before going to bed, I decided to keep the bin right in front of the door in case somebody tried to open it. At least that would make noise. I took out my deodorant and knife and kept it right next to me on the pillow before laying in bed. I kept looking at both of the windows on the side to see if anyone was out there. About an hour and a half later, the metallic door started rattling violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Instantly I stood up and got a hold of the knife and deodorant. My mouth went dry and my heart started beating fast. I didn't know if I should scream because I only knew of one other girl who was staying in the opposite hut. After what felt like forever, the door stopped shaking and I collapsed onto the bed. I checked the windows to see if anyone was walking by, but no one did. I tried to think of what it could have been. Maybe it was the wind, but the curtains hadn't moved one bit. It had to have been a person. I don't know when, but I passed out soon after. I woke up at around 6 a.m. to see that it was almost bright outside. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but when it started happening again, frantically, I shot up in bed, ready to attack. But once again it stopped after a few minutes. I didn't even understand what was happening. Was it even real? I went closer to the door and got a look at the bin that I had kept by the door. It had moved away from its original position. Yes, something had definitely happened. Not knowing what to do, I opted to go back to sleep. When I got out of the room later, I tried to read the owner's face, but it was just as hard to read as the day before. What worried me the most was that I had to spend another night in that room. I decided to not let that thought spoil the day, and went out with the two friends I'd made for a trek, and then watched the sunset from a hilltop, where all the locals gathered to play music in the evenings, including that owner. My new friends and I went somewhere else after that, and at around 10 I decided to head back to the guest house for dinner. As I was nearing the hotel, I got a text from the owner asking me where I was. I didn't think much of it because it was late, and he was probably wondering if I was safe. I didn't reply as we were almost there. When we sat down on the futon, the owner said, "I was just about to text you," and showed me the message he typed on his phone. "I was just thinking about you," read the message. I'm not sure what that meant, so I looked at his face trying to read him, and realized he was doing the same. I tried to act normal, and told him where we were. We all sat, met a couple of other people, ate, smoked, and around 11 the guys decided to head to their guest house. At that point I got up and told him I was going to my own room. He looked at the time and asked me why I was ending the night so early. I told him I was tired from all the walking and that I wanted to be up early. He didn't push any further, as there were other people around. I went back to the room filled with anticipation and dread, but thankfully nothing happened that night. The next day I checked out, but my bus wasn't until 5 p.m. I didn't want to be left alone with the owner, so I met up with the guys leaving my luggage at the reception, which was also the eating area. When I came back, I picked up my bag, thanked him, and left. I still have no idea if it was the owner, or the only helper that I'd seen around. Whoever it was trying to forcefully get through my door. Let's not meet. Do you know those silly school trips that last a few days? I used to go on many of those, as many as I could in fact. I loved them. It was always fun to choose your roommates and decide who went in which bed. I would have been about 11 or 12 at the time. Everyone else involved being roughly the same age. This trip was meant to be like any other, and was for English class. It was about a certain author that we were studying. The day started ordinary. We got off the coach and went up to our designated rooms. In the room was a shower and toilet, and 4 bunk beds. One was closer to the door, and the second was parallel to it on the opposite side of the room. I was on the bottom bunk. My friend Rosa was on the bunk on top of me. My other friends, Eloise and Noelle, were on the other bunk. Eloise was on the bottom, and Noelle was on the top. To get into our room, you had to go up 2 flights of stairs and into a little foyer area. From there, you had a door directly to the left of the foyer entrance. Go through that door, and there were 2 more doors, one to the left and one straight forward. The one directly in front of ours. It's important to note that some friends of ours were in the room to the left. We were allowed to go out in small groups into the town/village area as long as we were with a teacher. I remember my room and the room next to us, and went out to grab some snacks and food, as we would not be having food until the next morning. As our room was bigger, we went in there to enjoy our feast. It must have been around 6 p.m, perhaps even later. Our school was very friendly. Everyone pretty much knew everyone, so we would have a set time where we would all go down to talk, socialize and play snooker, and watch Love Island with subtitles, or just generally chill out. Our teachers would join in as well. It was quite fun. We would usually go up to our rooms at around 10 to 11. That night we went up at 10. My roommates and I stayed up for a while, talking and sharing sweets. The rooms next door didn't have a toilet, and they were worried about what they could do, so decided that instead of being smart and just giving them our room key and taking it back in the morning, that we would keep our door unlocked for them. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep around midnight, after everyone else had passed out too. I woke up a short while later, completely knackered and half asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so when I heard the door click shut, I immediately woke up. I assumed it was one of the girls next door coming in to use the toilet, but it wasn't. I heard a low grunt, or panting, which confused my still asleep brain to no end, but I concluded that it was one of the male teachers who just forgot to check up on everyone. It's not that uncommon. What I did not expect was the dude to come over and sit down on the edge of my bed, as if he were getting ready to get in it. He sat on my foot, and I guess he felt it, because he stood back up and put his hands on the end bars of the ladder on both of the bunks. I assumed trying to stay standing. For some reason I still thought it was a teacher, but I was starting to wake up a little at this point, starting to take in the situation. I heard him say, "This is not my room. It's a room with girls in it." I just replied, "Yes, it is." It was weird, it wasn't really a question, and he didn't sound confused or embarrassed. He stated he was in a room full of young girls. He knew where he was. I'm pretty sure he purposefully looked for a girl's room. He also didn't speak very normally. Looking back, I'm astounded as to why I wasn't freaking out. Note, this is only the first night. A lot of crazy things happened on that trip, some which will haunt me forever. Always lock your doors, no matter what. Be smart, be safe, and remember, if something happens to you, especially if someone does something to you, it's never your fault. You're not alone. Anyway, I heard slight shuffling and the door clicked shut again. That's when it clicked for me. There was an unknown man in our room. I spoke to him, and I bolted up in a sitting position and quietly slipped out of bed, grabbing our room key off the coat hook we put it on. Then I saw legs. I would have screamed if I wasn't so stunned, scared and tired. I scrambled back into bed, which is when Rosa woke up. She was incredibly tired, and I was on the verge of a panic attack. I got up off the bed so that she could see me, and just pointed at the legs, When she saw them, she went wide-eyed and looked like she would join me in panicking. We began whispering, trying to figure out what to do. Then Noelle woke up, asking us to be quiet as she was trying to sleep. So Rosa broke the news that we probably wouldn't be sleeping properly at all that night. Noelle didn't believe us at first, so I tiptoed over to her and showed her the legs. Then it hit us. He was naked. There was an unconscious man in our room just in front of the door, blocking out the only escape route from the room. So far it wasn't looking great. I went over to Eloise and shook her awake. She scared us half to death with how badly she sounded. We were terrified that this man had come into our room with bad intentions, and we were either pretending to be unconscious so that we could go near him, or that he had somehow managed to knock himself out. But if we went near him, he might awaken. I got Eloise to calm down, and Rosa once again explained as I started to break down. The other girls close behind me were in distress. We got our phones and started calling every friend and contact that was on the trip with us, desperately hoping they were awake, so that they could come and save us. But sometimes you have to be your own hero. We were trying to stay calm and figure out a plan, when Noelle was able to reach Dad on the phone. He gave us some advice about how to handle the situation, but ultimately told us to get out and find some help. Remember that the man went into the entryway, blocking the door with his head? It felt like we were trapped, but we decided to just do it. If it went wrong, we would just hit him on the head with the door. Simple. Noelle went first, followed by Eloise, then me, then Rosa. The door was only slightly cracked, so we had to move quickly and quietly, trying to fit through the crack as best we could. Otherwise, we ran the risk of hitting him and waking him up. I'm fairly certain Rosa hit him on the head just to spite him. I wish I had had the confidence to do that too. We went through both of the doors, out into the open space and foyer area, and left the end of the area. One was the male teacher's room, and I remember frantically knocking on the door, still being careful not to wake the man or anyone else up, but no teacher answered. So we kind of just stood there in the middle, freaking out, crying ourselves a river. Looking back, I feel kind of stupid, but I can't change the past. Then all of the teachers on the trip came out of a corridor talking quietly. Obviously seeing us sobbing, seeing me and Noelle collapsed on the floor in a breakdown, was not what they had expected to see that night. Apparently the man had been walking around most of the rooms trying the door handles, knocking on the doors just trying to get in. My male teachers had caught him and taken him downstairs. At that point he had a bedrobe on. My teachers had gone to one of their rooms to figure out what they should do. Since we were underage and part of the school, they had to call the police. We had to stay up and wait for the police to arrive. We had to go to a separate area where the female teacher's room was and calm down over there. Can I just say that the lady who told us to be quiet, because she and her husband wanted to spend some quality time together and we were disturbing their peace? Screw you. We were traumatized 12-year-olds. When the police arrived, they took the man downstairs, and we were asked some questions and answered some in return. The police told us the man wasn't drunk nor on drugs. He had no reason to be there and had no idea what his intentions were and what he was doing that night. He was kicked out of the hotel and was never allowed back again. But nevertheless, it was quite creepy, and I never wished to see him again. A few years ago, me and my now ex went on a weekend away together. We ended up staying at the Hilton Hotel, which was lovely, and we had a really great time. But I'll never forget the last night we stayed there. Throughout the trip, we kept seeing the same hotel worker. I mean, he did work there. But with it being quite a large hotel with many staff, you think we wouldn't run into the same one all too often, but there he was. He was there when we ate. He was there when we went to use the pool, and every time I walked past him, he'd give me the strangest look. I remember on our last day, I left the room to go get some more ice, and guess who appears as I was at the dispenser? You guessed it. The same guy. I thought as we were leaving in the morning anyway, I tried to ease the unnecessary tension and smiled at him and tried to make small talk. He just point blankly ignored me and glared at me, watching me intensely as I finished filling my bucket, as I left very stupidly and said bye and offered a half wave. This visibly angered him, and he actually started to grind his teeth, so I very briskly walked back to our room. Once I was back, I very casually locked our door and also applied the chain. Unnecessary, I know. Nobody without a key card could get in, but I just felt a bit creeped out. I didn't mention anything about it to my ex. I just wanted to enjoy our last night, and we did. Well, up until about 3 a.m. anyway. We were laying, chilling, and cuddling in bed trying to sleep, when we both shot up as we heard what sounded like the doorknob start to jiggle. We both looked at each other surprised, but I assured her someone probably just had the wrong room. I was sure of that assumption until we heard the familiar beep and the door unlock. Someone had a key. Someone we didn't know or expect. The door slowly pushed open until it snagged on the chain, and upon realizing this, the intruder swiftly closed it. We were both stunned, but I quickly snapped out of it, hoping I could catch a glimpse of who it was. I ran to the spy hole and peeked through it just in time to see a hotel employee briskly walking away. I could only see the back of them, but I knew who it was. I wanted to tell the desk what had occurred because my ex begged me to stay with her and that she didn't want to leave the room. So I did. We tried to sleep, but couldn't, and checked out first thing. I did mention it as we left, and they said they'd look into it, but I never heard back. The Hilton is a lovely hotel, truthfully. I'd love to stay there again one day. But that creepy hotel employee really spoiled that night for us. This story was passed down to me from an ex-coworker. The story goes that the first time her husband and her came to the big city, they drove him really late at night and were extremely tired. As a result, they just grabbed the first motel they could find. Their room was the type that had a little kitchenette, fridge, small sink, tiny stove and the like. Not that they needed that stuff, they just wanted a place to crash. At around 2 a.m. the door to their room opens. She said she thought she heard something, but was exhausted, and didn't wake up until the room was flooded by the light from the refrigerator. That's when both her husband and her sat straight up in bed, and then some guy just casually was looking in their empty fridge, hoping for some food. Her husband leapt out of bed, with his fists held high. He was a big guy, ready to land a destructive blow, and this guy lets out a yelp and bolts for the door. They locked the door, but her husband stood watch for most of the night. When they left in the morning, she said that they could see that the motel they'd picked was a real dive, and they would have never have stopped there in a million years had they have seen it in the daylight. About a year ago, I stayed at a hotel for about 2 weeks. I was there on a school trip kind of thing where we visited rivers, museums, and other geographical locations. To make it cheap enough to be there for 2 weeks, we had to bring one small suitcase and could wash our clothes. Everything was fine. We had visited volcanoes that day, and I knelt down on ash and had to use the sketchy washers. It was expensive as hell, £5 for a simple wash and spin, no dry. So I washed my underwear, shirts, jeans, and some of my roommate's clothes to make the most of it. I paid and put it on. I didn't even think about it until the next day when I came to get it. I put it on overnight. When I opened the washer again, I noticed that all of my underwear had gone. My bras and panties were just not there. I checked the washer again and they were definitely gone. I thought maybe my roommate had taken them by accident and asked her, and she said that she took her clothes but none of mine. I thought it was a bit weird, and maybe I didn't put any of my underwear in there, so I ignored it and carried on with the trip. Then I had to wash my clothes again because I'd run out of clean shirts, and did the exact same thing and washed my remaining underwear. This same thing happened. Everything else there, underwear gone. At this point I was pissed. I had 3 pairs of underwear left in about 5 days, and I went to my teacher and said that all my underwear was gone after I washed it. He said maybe I dropped them somewhere. I was too tired to fight him and make a scene, so just agreed and left to sleep. Turns out other girls were having the same problem. I don't want to think that someone took them because that's disgusting, but that's what probably happened. And I lost my favorite bra. I don't like hotels anymore. My disappointment was immeasurable, and my day was ruined. I used to work at a hotel in a small town. A few years into my tenure, a woman checks in. She seems ordinary. I had been through so many guests at that point, I honestly didn't notice anything strange about her, and carried on with my day. The next day, when I arrive at work, I was informed by the person I was relieving that a tragedy had unfolded in the middle of the night. She went into the details. Turns out the woman that I had checked in yesterday had gone gaga. Something had happened. She had apparently had a fight with a boyfriend, as a man had come stomping down the stairs and out the lobby in the early hours of the morning. Then, a loud noise emanated around the hotel. The woman had thrown herself from the balcony of her room and landed on a car. Needless to say, she didn't make it. A pretty horrific thing to get informed at when you start your shift. I feel sorry for the lady, but love compels us to do some crazy things sometimes. In September of 2016, I was a 28-year-old student of engineering at Aarhus University, Denmark. And after having planned and arranged my exchange year as part of the Erasmus program for some months, the time had finally come to depart and head for Brussels, Belgium. I could only move into my flat in a student residence, but on the 20th of September, that is when my contract started. However, my classes were scheduled to begin on the 12th, so I thought it would be reasonable to arrive in Brussels a week earlier on the 5th and sleep in a hostel until moving into my flat, so that I could get a chance to discover the city, familiarize myself with public transport, buy a student's ticket that would allow me to use the metro, tram and bus for the coming year for free, and that way I could deal with all the formalities and paperwork without any pressure. I also had to buy some things for my flat. Wi-Fi was free in the residence, but I still had to buy a router. So I had all the time in the world to deal with stuff that I was looking forward to and having a great time getting to know the city, as well as new people and the new culture. French skills weren't a requirement in my case, as my classes would be held in English, but maybe I could even pick up some French before diving into my studies at Brussels University. Now, for the sake of understanding, I am a gay male, and not scared of telling anyone when the subject comes up. In fact, I'm very relaxed about it, and people would probably describe me as quite masculine, straight acting, and good looking. At least, that's what their perception of me is. I can be a little nerdy when it comes to the topic of engineering, but I'm usually pretty open-minded and sociable. So even though my arrival went smoothly, I quickly felt a little lonely, and was glad to hit up conversation with people, which, however, wasn't always easy considering the language barrier at times. I was still very excited and positive though, and couldn't wait to immerse myself into my new environment. I checked in at the hostel, stowed my luggage away and made myself comfortable to get some rest. It was a 4-bedded room, and I could tell that 2 other beds were used and 1 was unoccupied. Shortly after, the most gorgeous and handsome guy entered the room. I was flabbergasted, as I was 100% sure that I was just experiencing what people called love at first sight. I was having the hardest time averting my eyes, but I tried my best since I didn't want to creep him out. He was tall, very slender, had longish blonde hair and pale skin, pouty lips, and the greenest eyes I had ever seen, carrying heavy luggage. He entered the room and greeted me with a bonjour and a shy smile. He looked a little exhausted, so I figured that I should leave him alone and not strike up a conversation with him right away. I took a short nap, and after some time had passed and gathered all my courage, I struck up a conversation. "What's your name? Where are you from? What brought you here? How old are you?" The usual stuff. I just had to get to know this beauty. According to him, his name was Alex, 22 years old, from Slovenia, who was just traveling around Europe. I remember finding it a little weird that a 22-year-old could just afford to travel around like that, because as we know, traveling isn't exactly cheap. He was also very hesitant when it came to his work or studies. When we were talking about our hobbies and interests, he tended to keep it very general. His answers were vague and nebulous. I concluded he was shy, which, at the time, made him even cuter to me. I quickly found out that he was single, and when I admitted to him that I was gay, he did not seem shocked in the least. Instead, he was very accepting and didn't mind at all. We even joked about it. However, I didn't really find out whether he was gay or straight. I was simply happy to be able to talk to someone who was shy, though friendly and accepting, in a city where I had never been. Admittedly, I wasn't only stunned by his looks. He also seemed to have a good sense of humor, be intelligent, and I'm not a native English speaker, but believe me when I say this guy's English was close to flawless, even though his way of speaking appeared kind of weird for a guy this age. While he didn't mind others using it, he never used profanities. He also never used bros, dudes, or anything like that. I could tell he was also fluent in French, but when I asked him to say something cool in Slovenian, he refused. He was shy, smart, funny, polite, handsome, and weird. He seemed perfect, and I thought I was in love with him. My exchange here couldn't have started any better. I felt like I could talk to him forever, but yes, I did notice that he tried to be as vague with his answers as possible whenever I asked him a question. He preferred to be the one asking the questions, and just listening, laughing and cracking a joke every now and then. It turned out that he actually knew Brussels quite well, even though he'd just been traveling around, so I took the chance and asked him to maybe show me around a bit and have a drink. Surprisingly, he agreed. Night fell and we headed out to the city centre. He showed me around, explained stuff, gave recommendations for restaurants, sites. He was even kind enough to tell me to avoid certain parts of town because of the ill sentiment towards gay people in those areas. All this made him even more sophisticated and worldwise to me. Bear in mind that I still had no clue whether he was straight or gay. He really helped me find my way around the city, even assisting me in finding the shortest way to my faculty. He had obviously visited before. Later, we headed to a bar with people from all over the world. Yet again, he was shy, but very sociable, and very accepting of anybody. He didn't mind me drawing other people into our conversation. He would get along with everyone. He'd listen, ask questions, listen again, and accept. He would stay neutral and never give a definite opinion. His laid-back personality was in contrast to his carefully chosen words. You could pair him up with the greatest prick and he would get along with them. This was also the year President Donald Trump assumed office, so I had many heated arguments with American tourists. They were all awesome people, by the way, and just when I thought Alex would back me up, he instead chose to de-escalate the situation and not take sides. He apparently hated getting into fights or arguments. At this point, I was rather confused about him. I didn't quite appreciate that he always insisted on paying the bills and sharing food. He most likely thought that I felt hopeless for being all alone in a town I'd never been to before, but after all, I was several years older than he, and had enough money to take care of myself. Things were under control, and I thought he was exaggerating a bit. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't pushing him into anything, and I wasn't mad at him either. I just wanted to be the one to have the pleasure of spoiling and caring for him, offering him things and inviting him, maybe even having a relationship with him. And yes, I admit I made a move on him, But as soon as I understood he wanted to keep his distance, I respected that. One night I was so wasted I had to calm down the taxi driver and make sure I didn't soil the taxi. I should have known better, and apologized to him in the morning. I may be wrong in saying this, but I was certain that he liked me too, at least back then when I was totally head over heels in love with him. During our stay together at the hostel, I got to meet many different people from different countries and backgrounds. There were middle-aged men, French-speaking guys, Moroccan guys, on business trips, Chinese students, German tourists, a whole collection of people. As I said, I got along with Alex really well, and I was convinced that there was some sort of connection. Whenever the Moroccan guy snorted too loudly, Alex and I would exchange annoyed looks, and he would politely ask the guy in French to keep the noise down. Alex didn't sleep much anyway. I quickly learned that he just wanted to make sure I could get enough sleep. And one time Alex claimed to have overheard a conversation two German guys had, joking about my homosexuality, and advised me to be careful. He said that they hadn't been mean, but that I should take them with a grain of salt. And although I was grateful, I couldn't help but confront him about how he was able to understand them when he told me before he couldn't speak German. "I'd just make out some bits," he said. So I was not totally blinded by love. I knew he was weird still, and I did notice whenever we were out and about he used to glance over his shoulders a lot and be extremely aware of his surroundings, to the point where he almost seemed disinterested in our own conversations. And there were some other unusual things. He dyed his hair 3 times during his stay. He would change his clothing style on an almost daily basis. One day skater, the next day businessman attire, the day after hipster. I would also sometimes overhear him talking on the phone outside the room, and I'm 100% sure I heard him talk in fluent German and Russian. And I don't speak those languages well, but I must admit, it did sound very convincing. In the afternoon of the 4th day of our week in the hostel, I was just taking a nap and suddenly awoken by Alex storming out the room. I noticed he had left one of his bags open, sitting beside the bed, and decided to stow it away in his locker, which he had also left unlocked, so that the others wouldn't be tempted to steal anything. Well, curiosity got the better of me, and I started to rummage around in his stuff. I know I shouldn't have done it. I found an additional mobile phone, European, Russian, and Swedish currency, and 3 different passports, different issuing countries under different names with different birth dates and slightly different pictures. You could tell it was him though. I also flipped through a notepad full of notes in different languages and handwriting styles. I was creeped out at this point. I was sure that he pretty much lied to me all along. Nothing made sense. He claimed to be from Slovenia, yet I'd never heard him speak it. He also seemed to refuse to speak it. He also claimed not to speak German, yet I was absolutely sure, as I said, that I heard him speaking German. And what about his Russian skills? And the rubles in his bag? Why did he have a Swedish krona? And where were all these passports from? As well as his constant changes in appearance. I decided I wasn't gonna confront him directly, as I didn't want him finding out that I'd been going through his stuff. When he came back an hour later, he didn't appear to be very amused to learn that I had stowed his bag away for security reasons. He wasn't mad though. He was never mad. Never expressed any strong opinion about anything. Maybe he wasn't shy. Maybe he was hiding something, or hiding from someone. The following days were as fun as the previous ones. We spent our time together when we had the time, went for drinks at night, discovered this huge diverse city, and went shopping. Visited some sites, went out to eat, and yes, of course, I had a hard time containing myself whenever he undressed to use the shower. And yes, I could get a little touchy-feeling when we were tipsy. I even went ahead and tried to kiss him on a few occasions, making sure that it was just me joking around. Often, he used to shrug or laugh it off, considering my drunkenness. He never played along with my advances, but didn't seem to mind me making a move on him either, and his enigmatic behavior and mystery made it even worse. After the incident with the bag, he made sure his belongings were always stowed away in his locker, and I think he grew a little suspicious, so I wasn't really able to find out more and he definitely wasn't going to open up by himself. Those days were a crazy roller coaster ride full of action, new experiences, mystery, and emotion. There were some other occasions where I tried to trick or challenge him, but to no avail, and I quickly gave up my attempts to try and find out more, and decided to be content with the great time I had with this stranger. After all, I had realized that despite everything, he wasn't a danger. His stay at the hostel came to an end, and Alex had to leave first. It was the most awkward goodbye I'd ever had. He had already given me his number, and I tried to message him via WhatsApp many times, but never got an answer. Whoever Alex really was, I would die to meet this wonderfully creepy guy again, and to find out what he really was about. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. You might notice that the acoustics are different today. We've had some nightmares at home. Our internet yesterday morning at around 10:30 cut out, and of course I called up the internet company straight up, and and of course they were like, yeah, it's gonna take 72 hours to fix, at least. So that was disconcerting, and then we have like a little backup small internet router from Sky. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just use the backup, because if any of you have been listening to me for this long, you might recall that this happened about a year ago, where I had some massive internet trouble. So I decided to get this backup, and I turn on the backup, and it doesn't work. So I call Sky, and every time I'm like 20 minutes into the call, they hang up, and this happened twice, and at that point I was just getting really frustrated, and I was like, forget this. So yeah, it's been pretty bad. And halfway through recording this video, the microphone stopped working, which I've had to record at my brother's house because I wasn't able to load the stories in the first place. And his microphone, for some reason, wouldn't connect to my computer. So I had to drive all the way back home, then get mine, and then come back. Then Pandora woke up mid-nap, so it became even more challenging to finish this recording. You can say that getting this video out on time, if it does launch on time, is a miracle in itself. But enough about me complaining. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to let me know. It's been a challenge to make. One of the most challenging ones to make in a long time. But I suppose you do get days like that. Yeah, all is good other than that. I just hope you guys like the video, really. Some fun stories for sure. Thanks to my members and patrons and Ko-fi supporters as well. If you want to check out those things, you can do that. But for now, I'm gonna, leave you with these links so you can watch another video if you want. Stay awesome, sorry for the complaints, and I'll see you in the next one.